How's it going, everybody? It's Master1994 here, and today we are going to take a look at my Protection Warrior in Classic World of Warcraft, and especially how it relates to PvP, which I know is a little bit unorthodox, but I think it'll be very interesting, and I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. As always, there is a table of contents in the description below, so if you want, you can go ahead and take a look at that table of contents, and you should be able to find exactly what you want to see. Again, this build, it's a little bit unorthodox, or a lot unorthodox, but I've been working with it, I'm having fun with it, so let's get started. Alright, let's start this video off by kind of quickly going over where I am with my character. So, in my guild, I am now the main tank. I was third priority tank. I was rocking the Annihilator, doing the Annihilator debuff when I wasn't tanking. But both of our main tanks, or our main tank and off tank rather, had personal issues. So I am now main tanking. In our guild, Oni and MC are obviously on farm. We are progressing BWL. We've had a few setbacks, but I've personally seen Broodlord, and I'm hopeful that we'll start progressing it without any real problems. It's a very good group of players. So the BWL gear is well within reach. As far as my gearing goes, for my off pieces, I'm getting DPS gear, right? Onyxia's neck, I've got Hand of Justice, Blackstone Ring, Don Julio's band, so some decent off pieces. For my weapon, I've got Deathbringer, a very strong one-hander, slow, scales very well with deep wounds, overpower, whirlwind, it scales very well with all these abilities. But with the release of BWL, you have a lot of opportunities for very good one-handed weapons. As far as my actual gear goes, the set piece slots, I have a lot of tank gear right now. My end goal, I think what I'm going to try to play with is maybe get the 5-piece Wrath set and then fill in the other pieces with DPS gear. So one example is I have SGC. I'm not using it right now, but I have SGC, which is a very strong DPS chest piece. So I'll probably fill in the other slots with Wrath gear, get SGC, get some other decent DPS pieces. As far as my rank goes, I am rank 7. It's busy season at work, so I'm not getting to progress as much as I would like right now, but my end goal is to get rank 11, because as you've probably noticed, I am rocking a slow mount. Even though I have the money to buy the fast one, my end goal is to get rank 11 and save that like 700 gold by buying the cheap PvP mount. I think it's a very possible goal. Again, it's just busy season at work, but I think I can do it with my prop warrior. But that's kind of the personal goal, the personal test, and that's where I'm at. So with all that being said, let's get into the talents. So for our talents, let's quickly go over the talents, and then the important ones I'll talk more about while we're watching gameplay. Firstly, we want shield specialization, increasing our chance to block and generating rage when we block. Very important against like rogues, classes with pets. It's good against warriors. If you can block, it's an awesome talent. Pretty basic talent. Next, we want improved blood rage. Not only is it good on its own, but we want last stand. We'll talk about that in a second. Anticipation and toughness technically would make us more tanky, but the benefits that we get from these talents are very minimal, a lot worse than you would expect based on the tooltips. So for PvP purposes, I've pretty much went with Iron Will, giving us a 15% chance to resist stun and charm effects, and you will notice that you have Iron Will, so it's a pretty decent talent. Again, last stand, very effective. It's going to save us a lot. You'll notice that I'm using this talent quite a bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about last stand later throughout the video. I'm picking up improved shield block because for PvE purposes, you want 1 point in it. That's a pretty well-known fact. You can look up about why if you would like. Improved revenge is where we're starting to see our prop warrior kind of blossom. We're getting some flavor, we're getting some PvP usage. This makes your revenge ability have a 45% chance to stun the target for 3 seconds. And what's really important to note about this is this 3-second stun does not DR with other stuns. So it really opens up your warrior to CC chains. And we're going to talk a lot about revenge as we're watching gameplay. Next, Defiance, again, PvE effectiveness, just increasing our threat. And obviously, all these talents that increase our PvE effectiveness, it's going to help us in Alterac Valley. So really, there is some benefit to our PvP also, because we're going to be tanking in AV a lot. Next, we're going to jump to Concussion Blow and Improved Shield Bash. Again, improving our CC capabilities, which we're going to talk a lot about our CC as a prot warrior. But 5-second stun and a 3% blanket silence being attached to our Shield Bash or our Interrupt. Very important talents for PvP. Next, one-handed weapon specialization, very basic, just a 10% damage increase to one-handed weapons. Sadly, and probably obviously, this does not increase the damage of our Shield Bash or our Shield Slam because these are shield abilities. But that leads us into Shield Slam. We're this far in, we might as well get Shield Slam. It's actually pretty decent damage. It is not a Mortal Strike, obviously. It does not have a 50% debuff to healing attached to it, but it does passively dispel enemies, and again, it's a pretty decent amount of damage. For Fury, we just want the 5% increase to crit, pretty essential for all warriors. And then for arms, we want improved rend, because we are going to be using rend a little bit in PvP, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. All my extra points are going into deflection to increase our parry chance. We obviously want tactical mastery and anger management, both very important talents for PvP. And another well-known fact is that the anger management tooltip is a little bit misleading, or a lot misleading. It actually causes us to passively generate 1 rage every 3 seconds, whether we are in or out of combat. So when you're in combat even, you're generating 20 points of rage per minute. That's a free shield slam. So it's very, very important. And then deep wounds. Now in PvP, this is going to increase our damage by about 5%. And then also it's important to note that for PvE, bosses obviously have 16 debuff slots, but deep wounds is a low priority debuff, which means it will only replace other low priority debuffs. And luckily there are no important low priority debuffs, so your raid is not going to be mad at you for picking up deep wounds. What's really going to happen is a bunch of warriors in your raid group are going to have deep wounds, and you guys are just going to be replacing each other's deep wounds, because deep wounds won't replace corruption or sunder armor or any of those important debuffs. Let's start this discussion by talking about the Protection Warrior's biggest asset in PvP, and that is the CC chain. So I've already talked about it a little bit, but Revenge is a big player in this. So again, the Revenge stun that we've talented into does not DR with other stuns. So a lot of times we want to start up CC chains with the Revenge stun. Again, the talent gives us a 45% chance to stun the target of Revenge. Doesn't DR with our other stuns, Concussion Blow, for example. So if we get a proc, stun them for 3 seconds, then we can Concussion Blow them for 5 seconds. If it's a healer, you can also blanket silence him with the Shield Bash silence for 11 seconds of CC in a row that doesn't break from damage. So you can be wailing on healers and CC chaining them while your team is doing whatever else. There's a good chance someone's going to die, and it's really going to be effective in team fights. And that's bare bones 11 seconds. If you get an actual interrupt in there, or if you add in some fear bombs or whatever else, you're really going to start seeing some very large CC chains, and it's going to be very, very common. One important thing to note, actually a couple things. Let's talk about Revenge a little bit. So one, Revenge does not have to be used on the person that you blocked, dodged, or parried. So if you block, dodge, or parry anybody, whether it's a player or a pet or an NPC, you can use revenge on anybody. And I mention this because revenge's counterpart, which is overpower, can obviously only be used on the target that dodged you. But revenge, as long as you dodge, block, or parry anybody, you can use revenge on anybody. And that's important because you can you can dodge, block, or parry anybody and then switch to a healer and then revenge the healer and start this CC chain. If you add in fear bombs or the interrupts, like I said, the CC chain can very easily turn into 20 plus seconds of CC. One thing to note about the fear bomb also is that, so when you use the fear bomb, you target an enemy and they cower in fear, and then everyone else around you gets the fear bomb, similar to a priest's fear bomb. What's important to note about this is that the main target that cowers in fear, that fear CC breaks very, very easily from damage. It's almost like as soon as they take any damage at all, even just a dot tick, it breaks. So one thing you may want to do is, let's say we're talking about you're CCing a healer and there's a rogue on you. If you want to CC the healer, it may be better to switch to the rogue and use Intimidating Shout on the rogue. So the rogue gets the cower fear. That breaks very easily. And then the priest, who you wanted to actually CC, gets the running fear that doesn't break nearly as easily. That's another thing to note. And also you obviously have things like your disarms and whatever else. So you have CC all across the board, and it makes the prop warrior very fun. And I think that's really what is going to make this specialization shine in PvP. And we're not seeing a lot of that in this video, but now that Arathi Basin is out, I'm using a lot more CC chain. I'm pushing in behind the enemy lines, which is fine because I'm a prop warrior. I have plenty of defensive cooldowns. I'm more tanky. I can get back there. I'm not as worried about dying, and I can just wail on and CC healers and really change the tide of battle in some of these team fights. We obviously are not an arms warrior, so we don't have arms damage. We don't have the Mortal Strike debuff, obviously, but we still can be an asset to the team. And if you have a warrior on your team that has Mortal Strike, they can use Mortal Strike on the kill target, and you can start wailing on those healers. Again, we don't have as much damage. We do have decent damage. It's not uncommon for us to get some lucky procs and crits and do a couple thousand damage in one global. We have decent damage, especially against Clothies. We're gonna tear Clothies up. Not as much as arms, but we are more tanky, have more survivability, and that is also important in classic PvP. So all in all, it's not an arms warrior. It's a totally different specialization, but I still think there is a place for it in team fights. I'd like to also talk about our damage rotation as a prop warrior in PvP, and a lot of this is going to be relatively intuitive, but let's get into it. So obviously we always want to try to have Battle Shout active. We also want to keep Hamstring on the enemy and Demoralizing Shout if we're fighting someone that uses melee attacks a lot of the times. And then we obviously want to keep Rage pooled for certain situations. We might want to pull some Rage for a stun or for an intercept if we need it, or if we're fighting a Druid, we're going to want to pull Rage for Hamstrings so that we can slow them immediately after they shapeshift. Or if we're fighting a caster, we'll want to pull some Rage for Shield Bash, that kind of stuff. But after that, when we start getting into our damage, we're going to pretty much always prioritize Shield Slam. It does plenty of damage per rage, has a chance to dispel, which is awesome, and obviously there's a chance for it to crit, which is even more damage. After that, we're going to be using Rend, and in some situations, just the flat damage, Rend can do more damage per rage than Shield Slam, like if we're fighting a plate wear. But again, Shield Slam can crit and Shield Slam can dispel. So we're pretty much prioritizing Shield Slam, and then we're going to be rending the target after our Shield Slam is on cooldown if we have extra rage. After that, we'll, throw in some Whirlwinds if we want, or maybe even a Heroic Strike or a Cleave or whatever for single target. One exception is if we're fighting rogues, I like to keep rend on the rogue at all times, just so if they vanish or if they gouge and get a re-stealth or whatever, the rend has a chance to knock them out of stealth. It's harder for them to get away, to re-stealth, that kind of thing when there's a dot ticking on them. For AoE situations, and this is real big in Alterac Valley, we're going to charge in, intercept in, whatever. And we're going to prioritize Whirlwind. And then we're going to use, generally, I'm going to use a Thunderclap. And then I'm going to use a Demoralizing Shout. And after this, I'll probably stick to defensive stance and just start cleaving people, interrupting, CCing, that kind of stuff. Fear Bombs are great, right? Until Whirlwind is back up. And then I'll kind of restart that that Whirlwind and go back and forth from defensive stance to Berserker stance for the Whirlwinds. And that's pretty much it. Again, very intuitive, but there are a few exceptions to the rules. Like I said, with the rend on rogues, we want to pull rage for druids so we can hamstring. That's really important. Sometimes we'll pull rage just so we can get a shield slam if someone gets bubbled, right? So if someone gets bubbled by a priest, we're not generating rage when we do because we're not doing any actual damage. All the damage is getting absorbed. So we're not generating rage from those attacks. So it might be smart to pull rage for a shield slam if someone gets bubbled. So just think about things like that. Very quickly, I would like to talk about Prot Warrior in BGs. I think in World PvP, which I'll try to showcase in some future videos, I think in World PvP, Prot does a great job. But what about BG? So AV, obviously, this is kind of a no-brainer. There's a lot of PvE aspects in AV, so it's going to do great in AV regardless. But really, Warsong Gulch and AB, I think this spec is doing really well in team fights, especially now that AB is out and I can really do those team fights. I feel like it's very strong when I'm CCing those healers and doing my thing. And again, I'll try to show some videos of that. In Warsong Gulch, however, it's not a good flag runner because we don't have a ton of mobility. It's a good flag carrier if a druid, say, runs the flag to us and we hold the flag in our base. That's viable, but it's not an optimal flag carrier just because there's not as much mobility. But it's really strong in team fights and obviously very strong in AV. I'm going to conclude here, guys. I hope you learned a little bit about the specialization, and I plan on making some more videos in the future about it, more BGs, World PvP, that kind of thing. So stay tuned, and as always, thanks for watching.